a child peers into their mother's eyes, a time when her gaze is still unclouded, unfazed by the shadows of resentment bound to come her way. There in the hospital bed she had laid, with a thin sheet of sweat still present on her forehead, evidence of the laborious 9 months she had just endured leading to this sole moment. It is at this time when a mother's love is most untainted, but the seed of resentment had already been planted. Utang loob is a Filipino cultural phenomenon that describes a feeling of eternal debt towards others, primarily between family and friends who have done each other big favors. What I've noticed is this utang loob starts when a mother gives birth. Phrases like, "You have to do this because I am your mother," are a prime example of the guilt tripping that happens within utang loob. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with living for a sustainable future? Well, in my family, living for a sustainable future meant living the American dream. So right when I popped out of the womb, my dad migrated to America to create a life for us here. He worked 3 jobs, a custodian, a chef, a mechanic, you name it. This has made me feel an eternal debt to him that I can't repay. But this isn't a sustainable mindset to have. What we need to understand is that living for a sustainable future means making sacrifices without always expecting anything in return. It means making sacrifices, knowing you're creating a sustainable future that you won't always benefit from. Otherwise, utang loob can make or break families. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be here. The words echo in my ear, each breath telling me my life is a failure, I fear. Did my work have no merit? Did I fail to inherit that clock in, clock out, 9 hours a day spirit? You owe me like I loathe you, it hardens me, toughens me, I won't let it get through. I'll pay off my debts, so don't cry, don't fret. My checks will be cleared, I hope to forget that feeling of guilt, of indebtedness again. So goodbye, so long, and see me no more than a silent, distant, faraway friend. What happens when families adopt this utang loob mindset is a pattern of pushing each other away, because whatever positive relationships they've made with their family is overpowered by the need to escape this guilt. It's why many people choose to cut their families off. But amongst all that guilt tripping is my grandmother, who's in the crowd right now. She is a prime example of living for a sustainable future because she's made sacrifices for my family without expecting anything in return. Growing up, I had an analog clock, singing a light tick-tock, tick-tock. It would tick all day, though I never found it to be a disturbance, though always around. And just as permanent as that clock on the wall, in the kitchen, always ticking, was a woman I would call Mama. Mama, because she was a mother to us all. Whether you came out the womb or rang your doorbell, she'd welcome you with open arms and make your heart swell. And permanent, because the kitchen was her home. Sitting at the dining table, you'd never be alone. Always scrubbing, always cooking, always tasting her soups, chopping fruits, clanking pans. She was almost mute. Because when something is as constant as the ticking of a clock, or as set and permanent as migrations of a flock, you pay it no mind, no attention, no ounce of your time. It wasn't until after COVID-19, spending a year locked up in a tiny house with her, that I become aware of the little things my grandmother does for me every day. I realized I never asked her about her story. How did she create a sustainable future for herself and for her kids? So, in true grandma storytelling fashion, she told me her story over dinner. We sat at her tiny plastic dining table whose white surface was yellowing with age, and we were surrounded by all the free giveaway items she won from the casino and ran out of storage for. My mom, sister, dad, and I all crammed ourselves into her tiny 2-bedroom apartment when she finally told us about the turning point. The turning point was when she was just a little girl, 9 years old, ready to go out into the world. She moved out of the province, the comfort of her childhood home, and into her sister's humble abode. She was a child of a child, raised by a sibling. That's when she developed that small, tiny inkling which inspired her to live for a sustainable future, but that began in the classroom. So, good morning, teacher. She saw no more of the never-ending rice fields or the happy family laughter shared over warm meals. Her family she sacrificed to get an education, a chance to get out of her situation. She took it by the hand, and what she accomplished with only her mind, the world is astonished. My grandmother moved out of the Philippine province of La Union into Baguio City to live with her sister and to go to school. Though she didn't make it past elementary school, she didn't let that stop her from living for a sustainable future. She spent a lot of her days at her sister's antique shop, and Baguio, being the small city that it was at the time, meant everyone knew everyone, so they had a lot of frequent guests. One of those people being my grandfather, or my grandma's cousin-in-law. While I wouldn't go as far as to say that they had an arranged marriage, my grandmother was 16 at the time, while my grandfather was 24. And my grandma also had a long line of lovers waiting who sent her letters and love notes, but they were intercepted by her family members who felt she should be with my grandfather instead. So after thinking about it, she agreed. It was by her sister's suggestion, after all. Her sister who had sacrificed so much for her. And when she moved in with my grandfather and his family, she was treated like a real-life Cinderella. While she was carrying his child, she was treated like a real-life Cinderella. The turning point was when she was 4 months along working 2 jobs. One at a hole-in-the-wall inherited from her sister, the other in her own, after all, working for a match made in Mister. She was 5 months along, wondering, how did she get here? Doing dishes, mopping floors, her future is not so clear. Was this all there was to a life in the city? Do the chores, do the groceries, sit still and be pretty? She was 6 months along, only 16 years old, just a sitting maid and waiting to be told to do this, to do that, with her snobby, selfish attitudes. It drove her mad to stay quiet, to hold back, be polite like a lady, pipe down, don't be brash, you're holding my baby. She was 7 months along, only 16 years old, when she hit that turning point. Her hands were tired with a lifetime of labor, a 16-year sentence of life doing favors. I can't take this no more. I have to get out. So back to the province, her husband was out. Just her and her baby, saying goodbye to the hustling city world because no longer was she that puppet of a girl. She went on to give birth in the province where her mom and dad had lived. She was tired of the conditions she was living with. When she finally gave birth to her son, or my uncle, my grandfather came running back. He tried to convince her to come back to the city with him to live with his family. And yet again, she made another sacrifice. She knew that her children would be better off living with a father, and that he could better support them if they lived together. So she agreed. But this time, she was determined to make it on her own. She taught them to never underestimate a vengeful woman. She has ideas ruminating that you can't conceive. Never underestimate a vengeful woman. She has a quarry of clever tricks up her sleeve. Never underestimate a vengeful woman because no other driver is as strong as revenge. Never underestimate a vengeful woman because she's learned only on herself she can depend. Never underestimate a vengeful woman. She doesn't need a man or another's opinions. Never underestimate a vengeful woman because a vengeful woman makes the world her dominion. When my grandmother moved back to the city, she began an antiquing business. Taking after her sister, she rented out a small shop through loans and through some money she'd made working at a restaurant. Her husband's family pushed her against the idea because her sister-in-law already had an antiquing business, and they didn't want the competition. But she paid them no mind. She knew she had to create a sustainable, comfortable life for her kids. So despite all their judgments, she continued. Gradually, she saved up enough money to buy an old jeepney, or truck, to do deliveries with. She attracted more business and was able to expand her sales beyond Baguio. She even had a customer in France who she would ship furniture to. I guess you could say her business went global. She made enough to sustain herself and her 3 kids, all while my grandfather helped along, doing his best to do deliveries with them. Eventually, she saved up enough money to buy a house, but she was a vengeful woman, so she began construction on this house behind my grandfather's back. She hired a group of local builders to carve out a hill where she could build her house. She told them to build the bedrooms here and the kitchen there and the restroom here, and eventually she had built a 3-story home without a blueprint and with only an elementary school level of education. It wasn't until the house had a kitchen and was habitable did she tell my grandfather of her plans. In her own words, she told him, "Bahala ka na. It's up to you. I'm gonna live here with my kids, and it's up to you if you want to come along." So, against all odds, and only in her mid-20s, she was able to become financially stable and create a sustainable future for her kids. She made tremendous sacrifices to make sure that they didn't have to go through the same things she did. She worked long hours, making deals with businessmen far beyond her level of education, but she never backed down. Her antiquing business put her 3 kids through college, the military, and eventually to migrate to the US. But despite all of these sacrifices, she never expects anything in return. She's never made us feel this utang loob. To this day, she's just a phone call away if you need a babysitter for the night, or she's always open to making you a warm meal when you've had a bad day. My grandmother lives for a sustainable future simply by being kind, selfless, and understanding that living for a sustainable future means making sacrifices without expecting anything in return.